Welcome, detectives. My name is Jason Richards, Microsoft Technical Trainer and Data Detective. Our focus here is on how to use tools to design and secure your data models, and how to apply best practices for performance and scalability. You'll learn how to use features such as row-level security, object-level security, star schema design, and XMLA endpoints. By the end, you should be able to create data models that are robust, reliable, and ready for any challenge. Ready to start unlocking clues? Let's go. Our first case to crack revolves around access to data in a data model. There are two approaches to protecting data, and we'll investigate both. Let's dig into the case of the two sides to data access, starting with row-level security, or RLS. As a data modeler, you set up RLS by creating one or more roles. A role has a unique name in the model, and it usually includes one or more rules. Rules enforce filters on model tables by using DAX filter expressions. The animated image generally shows how RLS works in your model. By default, a data model has no roles. A data model without roles means that users who have permission to query the data model have access to all the data model. It's possible to define a role that includes no rules. In this case, the role provides access to all rows of all model tables. This role setup would be suitable for an admin user who's allowed to view all the data. You can create, validate, and manage roles by using several tools depending on where the model was created. For models created using Power BI, you can use Power BI Desktop. For Azure Analysis Services or SQL Server Analysis Services models, you can create, validate, and manage roles by using SQL Server Data Tools, SSDT. You can also create and manage roles by using SQL Server Management Studio or by using a third-party tool like Tabular Editor. If you've been following this video series from the start, how many times have I mentioned a star schema as a best practice? Must be pretty important, huh? So again, we recommend you apply star schema design principles to produce a model comprising of dimension and fact tables. It's common to set up models to enforce rules that filter dimension tables, allowing model relationships to efficiently propagate those filters to fact tables. All right, back to roles. There are different ways of defining roles, and let's investigate. Rule expressions are evaluated within row context. Row context means the expression is evaluated for each row using the column values of that row. When the expression returns true, the user can see the row. You can define rules that are either static or dynamic. Static rules use DAX expressions that revert to constants. Defining static rules is simple and effective. Consider using them when you need to create only a few of them, as might be the case at AdventureWorks, where there are only 6 US regions. However, be aware of disadvantages. Setting up static rules can involve significant effort to create and set up. It would also require you to update and republish the semantic model when new regions are onboarded. If there are many rules to set up and you anticipate adding new rules in the future, consider using dynamic rules instead. Dynamic rules use specific DAX functions that return environmental values as opposed to constants. Environmental values are returned from these specific DAX functions. Username or user principal name returns the authenticated user as a text value. Custom data returns the custom data property passed in the connection string. Non-Power BI reporting tools that connect to the dataset by using a connection string can set this property like Microsoft Excel. Defining dynamic rules is simple and effective when a model table stores username values. They allow you to enforce a data-driven RLS design. And as quickly as DAX appeared, DAX is gone. Must mean it's time to move on. When you create roles, it's important to test them to ensure they apply the correct filters. For data models created in Power BI Desktop, there's the View As function that allows you to see the report when different roles are enforced and different username values are passed. You can also use Tabular Editor and its impersonation feature to test roles in the service. Now that we have roles and tested them, we need to map some of those roles. Even though we can create dynamic roles that can restrict access based on login, some roles, especially static roles, need to be applied to users. Role mappings must be set up in advance of users accessing content. Role mapping involves assigning Microsoft Entra ID security objects to those roles. Security objects can be user accounts, group accounts, or security groups. When possible, it's good practice to map roles to security groups. That way there will be fewer mappings, and you can delegate the group membership management to the network administrators. For Power BI desktop developed models, role mapping is typically done in Fabric. For Azure Analysis Services or SQL Server Analysis Service models, role mapping is typically done in SSMS. When your data model has direct query tables and their data source supports single sign-on, the data source can enforce data permissions. This way, the database enforces RLS, and the model and reports honor the data source security. Calculated tables and calculated columns that reference a direct query table from a data source with single sign-on authentication aren't supported in Fabric. That solves the first part of our case. Now moving on to object level security, or OLS. DAX won't be involved in this one. As a data modeler, you can consider restricting user access to model objects. Typically, you apply OLS to secure objects that store sensitive data like employee personal data or social security numbers. When OLS is enforced, not only does it restrict access to tables and columns, but can also secure metadata. When you secure metadata, it's not possible to retrieve information about secured tables and columns by using dynamic management views, or DMVs. OLS is a feature inherited from Azure Analysis Services and SQL Server Analysis Services. The feature is available in Fabric and Power BI Premium to provide backward compatibility for models that were migrated. For this reason, it's not possible to completely set up OLS in Power BI Desktop. To set up object-level security, you start by creating roles. You can create roles the same way you do when setting up RLS. Next, you need to add OLS rules to the roles. You add OLS rules to a model by using an XML for analysis or XMLA endpoint. The read-write endpoint supports dataset management, application lifecycle management, advanced data modeling, and more. With XMLA endpoints, you can use a client tool like SSMS and third-party tool options too, like Tabular Editor, which is an open source tool for creating, maintaining, and managing models. This will be your go-to for default semantic models in Fabric lakehouses and warehouses. Once you've added the OLS rules, you can publish the model to Fabric. Use the same process for RLS to map accounts and security groups to the roles. In a report, when a user doesn't have permission to access a table or column, they'll receive an error message. The message will inform them that the object doesn't exist. Consider carefully whether OLS is the right solution for your project. When a user opens a report that queries a restricted object for them, the error message could be confusing and might result in a negative experience. To them, it looks like the report's broken. A better approach might be to create a separate set of models or reports for the different report consumer requirements. There are restrictions to be aware of when implementing OLS. You cannot mix row-level security and object-level security in the same role. If you need to apply RLS and OLS in the same model, create separate roles dedicated to each type. Also, you can't set table-level security if it breaks a relationship chain. However, model relationships that reference a secured column will work, providing that the column's table isn't secured. Lastly, while it isn't possible to secure measures, a measure that references secured objects is automatically restricted. Case closed. Before we wrap up the knowledge part, let's cover some modeling best practices, the icing on top of the knowledge cake, if you will. It's critical that your model enforces data permissions correctly and efficiently. The following list provides you with good development practices to apply. All are pretty self-explanatory. The main points to take away is less is more, model design is vital, and test and validate, then possibly test and validate again. Time to fire up the DetectoLab 5000 to apply our data access principles to practice. Let's jump in.
All right, back in the environment, and we're going to talk about security from row level security, object level security, so that we don't, so that we're providing least privilege in our reports as users are logging in and consuming them. But there's a lot more to it than that, and I kind of want to dig into that a little bit here while I have the opportunity, because applying row-level security is kind of simple in the tools, but I want to point out the differences between live connection and our other import modes, because we're dealing with direct lake when we're working with Fabric objects as the storage mode that it's working with. And then when we create Power BI reports in the Power BI desktop, we have import mode and direct query mode and the ability to create composite models because of that. Direct Lake works a little bit differently. It's more of a live connection than like an import or direct query mode. So I want to show you how that affects particularly working with roles in these services. So there's a whole bunch of different places that we're going to be able to manage roles at. And it depends on the type of mode, storage mode that you're involved in. So what am I talking about? Let's just dive in and kind of show this. So I've created not my default semantic model, but I've created semantic models outside of that default semantic model. One of the ways that I can connect to or manage roles is to run it through the service itself. So if you see here, I have this test model 1, and if I open this up and then open up the data model, here I can manage roles through here. Now, why does this make a difference? Why I can manage roles? You can also see I can create DAX measures and calculation groups from the service itself, from the Fabric service itself. So that's awesome. But I can also create roles. I think I have one in here. Sorry, my Bastion host is a little finicky sometimes, but that's all right. No, don't have any in here. This is test model 1, so I can manage the roles from there. Why am I bringing this up? Well, here's the deal. If I were to go to Power BI Desktop and I could open up a new report from this model, because I have the model published in the service, but I want to show the effect of what a live connection has on these models. So if I hit new and I want to get my data from a Power BI data set, which should be semantic model, you can see that test model 1 is in here, and I can connect to this. But this is a direct lake model, meaning that it's a live connection. So when I go into my modeling view, I can't manage roles or view roles from the Power BI desktop, which might be a limitation for this because it's a live model, direct lake. So how can I get around that? Let's go back into the service and I'll show you. Actually, I can go into this report. And let's go back home. And what I can do now is if I wanted to, I need to close out of this and open up a new one. So we'll open up a new report. We'll open up a new report, and then we'll get data out of this one as well. Because remember, I can not only connect to semantic models that are available online through the Power BI service, I can also get it from the resources themselves. So if I went into my Fabric resources, I could connect to a lakehouse or a warehouse, right? So let's look at this because there's different options that I can utilize for each one of these. So it gives me my sample lakehouse, but I want you to see this drop-down menu. I can connect to this, and if I use this, this will do essentially the same thing that the model did earlier. That's just connecting it as a Power BI data set. It connects as a live connection. What I could also do is connect to the SQL endpoint associated with the lakehouse, And this will provide me the ability to define the data mode, which means then I can change it to a direct query mode once I've put the data in here. And it essentially acts like any other SQL server that I'm connecting to. Then I have the ability to manage roles and do things like that because I have a direct query connection as opposed to the direct lake connection. So I want to point that out because that's going to affect the way that you're going to work with roles depending on how you open up the report and add your data in there. Because, you know, one of the options here to view the roles and to manage the roles is through Power BI Desktop. Now they're incorporating this into Power BI Service. So like I mentioned on the service itself, I can go in here and manage roles. And that's what I'm going to show you what I can do here through this end. Right. So there's two different types of roles that we can apply. There's static roles. And what I can do is I can apply these into, you know, my, a certain, maybe if I want a city and I can choose the column, like I want to make sure that the sales territory equals Great Lakes, I think is one of the territories. And this is awesome, by the way. Then I can save this and it's an untitled rule. Let me go ahead and name this. I'll just name it static for right now. All right. And then I'll save this. Now, one of the cool things about doing this, making rules or assigning roles, RLS roles in the service is that I can assign them in the service now. A role is just a parameter, so to speak, until we apply it to somebody in our tenant, which are usually email addresses. Now, these could be clients that have specific email address as long as they have access, like read access into the workspace. But I think I have some individuals in here. So I got Gary Gumshoe, if you remember, and I got VD Vigilante. So I can add these users or I can add groups. Or even better, I can add security groups to these particular roles that are in here. So what'll happen is that now that I have this static role, I'm assigning anybody that's in the Great Lakes territory to this role, right? So all they're going to see is the Great Lakes information if I set up my relationships right, because we're filtering that information from that Dimension City table and saying, okay, if you're signing in here, all you're going to see is Great Lakes information, which is fine. But I have the role. I think I have the role saved. Yes. So now there's another way and that's great. But now I have to create new roles for every region. And if I don't want just region, I want to do something else. And I got to create roles for all that and then assign them. And you can see how that could be a lot of work. What I can do instead is create what's called a dynamic. Now, let me try to get some real estate here so you can see what I'm talking about. And unfortunately, the data set that I'm working with doesn't have this in here. If you go through the labs and in the online content, it will kind of take you through this. Now, if I had my employee key, now we were setting up roles for our employees, right? What I don't have in my employee table here, I guess I'm all the way through, is email addresses. Let's say I had a column in my employee table that had email addresses, and it was just a column called email address, right? What I could do now, we're just assuming this, that I have a Dimension employee column called email address. What I can do now is use a DAX function called user principal name. And we'll call this one dynamic. I'll just rename it to dynamic. And I'm just going to show you, I don't have an email address column on here, so I'll just make a column up. But what I can do now is, let's say I want to filter, the territory out again, right? Or I want to filter Dimension. I want to filter everything that's in this Dimension City by, or I'm sorry, the employee. if I had the email address in here, I'll just use this employee equals, and then then I can use user principal name. There we go. So if I go back to if I go into the, it's not showing me what it's saying here, but now I can use this user relationship. And then I could use the employee if I wanted to. My dim employee, if I wanted to apply that to the ID, right? And what I could do is I could filter this out and just put whatever column I want to in here. So it could be in the employee column, or I can make it a customer column, or whatever. What I'm doing is I'm dynamically filtering this. Now what it's going to do is when somebody logs in, it's going to look for their email address, and then it will automatically look through all the column values that are associated with that, and it'll look for, okay, so Dimension City, if I'm looking for a certain, that sales territory in the Great Lakes, what it's going to do is it's going to find that because that territory is included in the employee information, what sales territory they're in, it's going to automatically filter that information by them. So now I don't have to apply this to every member of the group. It's going to run this by their email address. So it makes things a little bit easier when we have to add a lot of users to a single type of role, so to speak. Other than that, you can use both options in here. So that's applying role level security. You can do this in Power BI Desktop too when you have, if you're using, import direct query composite models, you can bring those into Power BI and use, the same interface, so to speak. It's just not here in the service. It's on Power BI Desktop. You can utilize that as well. What I do want to show though, however, is applying object level security. So let's go back into the report that I have that I think I had connected. All right. Do I have, no, this is not, doesn't have any data in here. This one does. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up and show you object level security. Now you can't apply object level security within Power BI Desktop itself or the service. You'll have to use XMLA endpoints. I guess a good thing to point out is where that's available at. So let's go back into my workspace here. And if I go into my admin settings, I can go into my capacity settings. And then from here, I should be able to enable a XML endpoint. Oh, in the settings. Maybe it's not in here. Export and sharing. Here we go. Integration settings under tenant settings. Allow XMLA endpoints. That needs to be in there. And then I'm pretty sure under capacity settings, there is a read-write setting that needs to be changed on here. There it is. Power BI settings, Power BI workloads. I'm sorry. So our semantic models, you can see here that my XMLA endpoint for this particular capacity is on read write. By default, it's a read. So what we need to do is make sure that that's on read write if we're going to use third-party tools in order to apply changes to our model. So once that's enabled on read write, right, then I can use third-party tools to manipulate this data or manipulate the model and then push it back into the service. And that's essentially what Tabular Editor does for me. Now, again, when I sign into say I'm not authorized. Yep. Yeah. Azure. Let's see. Test model 1. I think that's what we were working with. There we go. So now you can see I'm connected to it. This is what the read XMLA allows me to do. It allows me to read this into this particular service. Now you can see that I have a static role already created, this dimension city. So that's already in the model. I created this in the service, but you can see it's been applied. And you can see that sales territory equals Great Lakes. That's under that particular column. The other thing that you might notice is that there's object level security that can apply. So this is at a column level, right? By the way, your model permissions should be on read in order for these roles to actually take effect. So if you're going to work, by the way, you can do RLS and tabular. I could apply dynamic rules or static rules into any one of these using Tabular Editor. I'm not limited to just using OLS. In fact, I would recommend that if you're going to apply both object level security and row level security, because you can't combine them. You can't combine roles into both. It's got to be one or the other. So this is a good way to kind of manage that aspect of things. But what I can do is now I can change row level. I can create a new role, right? So I can create a new role. We'll call it OLS example, just so I show you. And now that I have this role here, I don't have any RLS or OLS enabled on this, but what I could do now is I could go in and select some of my objects in here and say I could read this, or I don't want you to do anything with it. I don't want any permissions between this and what this object level does. So what'll happen is when if somebody is associated with this role in service, tries to open up this report, this particular table will be unviewable for them, right? And that's what we're setting for table permissions in OLS. All right, so that's one way that we can define object level security. We can manage row level security in here and save that as well. And I also showed you where you can apply those, assign those models, assign the roles to the models through Power BI Service. But we can also come into here and go into security now. And I can also apply those to my users for that particular role. My static role, it doesn't have any users applied to it. So I can apply Gary to it. I'll add it. I can save it. And I can even go in here now and I can test in the service as that particular role. So I could open this up and make sure Gary is assigned to, if Gary was in there, he would be assigned to he would only be able to see the Great Lakes data. So I won't be able to see any other data in the report that contains to any other sales territory besides the Great Lakes. There's some other things I need to set up. Gary isn't really a real user. He's a sample user, so that's why it's not really working here, but hopefully you get the gist of it. That's security in a nutshell. nuances between direct lake and other modes. So be aware of that when you're working with row level security and object level security. Utilize Tabular Editor, get familiar with the tool. You can even test roles in Tabular Editor. So it's a very dynamic tool to be utilizing to update your models. Let's head back into the studio.
Nice work. We learned a lot about how to secure our models using row level security and object level security. We also seen how to use other tools to manage and test our roles and rules. And remember, as Sherlock Holmes once said, there is nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact. So don't be fooled by the data, look for the clues. Thanks for joining.